This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. Tonight, we welcome you to Reserve Forces Night 2013, presented on video podcast by courtesy of the Canadian Department of National Defence. Our speaker for this evening is the Commander of the Canadian Army, Lieutenant General Peter Devlin. And tonight, General Devlin has brought along a very special friend, Theo, the bomb disposal robot. General Devlin.
It's a super time and a great pleasure to be able to spend and share a few thoughts about Canada's Army with all of you, with the Royal Canadian Military Institute, Canada's preeminent institution that supports discussion on defense, security, and foreign affairs. And I thank you immensely, Gil, as well as honored members of the head table and all those involved in the Institute for providing me with this great opportunity to tell you about the Army of today, and as Gil said, the Army of tomorrow. But I think first, before talking about the Army of today, you need to understand a bit about where we've come from. And I could go back a couple hundred years to 1812, which seems to have a great amount of attention, and rightly so, here in the city of Toronto. I could go back to the Battle of York. I certainly would take this opportunity to highlight to all of you the 27th of April, which is when the city of Toronto will help celebrate 200 years plus. Will help celebrate the founding of our great nation. Will help celebrate the soldiers and sailors and Aboriginals that were part of a fantastic team that helped define this great land of ours. But for our purposes this evening, I'm only going to go back a decade or so, because I think it's important that you understand some of the things that have been key to establishing the power that is Canada's Army. There's been a lot of experience over the past decade plus, particularly the experience associated with the United Nations and NATO and coalition operations. For those, and I was fortunate enough to soldier with some of these leaders in the room, I could go back to the Balkans. Over 40,000 Canadian soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women served in the Balkans. We still have soldiers that are soldiering in the Balkans to help set the course of that particular region. They're all in Kosovo right now, and they continue to make us proud. 40,000 Canadians served in the Balkans, and there's a bunch of ribbons on soldiers and leaders in this room that served in the Balkans. Our largest expeditionary operation over the past many years, and in fact since Korea, has been Afghanistan. From Operation Apollo in 2001 through Operation Athena, where we had 3 rotations in Kabul and 11 in Kandahar, to Op Attention, which is doing the absolutely marvelous work of training and mentoring the Afghan security forces. Just think about the Afghans that have been touched. Just think about the strength of the coalition members that have been touched by Canadian soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women. Again, over 40,000 that have served in Afghanistan. And during our time in Afghanistan, we've also been busy with a whole bunch of other domestic and humanitarian operations. For example, we've been involved in the humanitarian response to earthquakes in Haiti, Pakistan, and Turkey. And I remember vividly our participation in Operation Hestia in 2010 in Haiti. And that was a particularly intense period of time, given we were still engaged in combat in Afghanistan at that period. Domestically, we've been involved in helping with flood relief in Manitoba and Quebec, hurricane relief in Newfoundland, and security support for the Olympics in Vancouver, as well as the G8, G20 summit here in Ontario. And that has defined that reloaded period that has brought us to the Army of today. And you know, that marvelous reserve force that we talk about has contributed over 25% of the forces over that period of time. And in my view, probably a bit of a biased view, we have the most integrated level of respect between the regular and the reserve force that we've had while I've been in uniform, and a recognition across the military that the reserve force is integral and key to the future of the Canadian forces. And I think that is something to celebrate, ladies and gentlemen. We've had to ensure that we have a wonderful managed readiness plan that allows us to be able to respond to the challenges of tomorrow. We've had to take care of our Afghan veterans and their families. We've had to institutionalize many things, structures, approaches, and I'll come back to that. We have a program, a very modern program, to be able to train for those challenges of tomorrow. We had to bring back an incredible amount of equipment, refurbish that equipment, trade some of it in so that we were ready for those challenges of tomorrow. And we've done that all while at the same time we've been involved in a significant amount of contribution to both domestic and expeditionary operations that I've spoke to. I hope you'll allow me, indulge me while I pause to change my uniform. And I'm going to use the assistance of Theodore, which is a counter-improvised explosive device robot. This is an example, ladies and gentlemen, of the lessons learned, the technology that we have been using and continue to use in our Army. Theodore is run by Master Corporal Yulin and Corporal Lacey. They are from the 2 Combat Engineer Regiment out of Petawawa. These are awesome young soldiers. Master Corporal Yulin with 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and Corporal Lacey with 1 combat tour in Afghanistan. And so just allow me to sort myself out. It's happening. Trust me. There you go. And thanks very much. So Sasha Povert-Novak, who sadly for him is stuck as my ADC right now, il vient de la Royal 22e Régiment, lui aussi, 3 tours en Afghanistan, with 2 different battalions. I stole him from our school of leadership and recruit training in Saint-Jean. Thanks. So listen, I'm now decked out in arid CADPAT. And interestingly for me, this is the uniform that the vast majority of Canadian soldiers today feel most comfortable in. And in fact, an entire generation of soldiers knows only arid CADPAT. That generation of soldiers knows the routine of training and preparing to deploy to the deserts of Afghanistan. They know about how wonderful it is to work alongside coalition partners. They know how wonderful it is to work as part of a whole of government team. They know all about how important it is to deliver stability, to work with international and non-governmental organizations to help Afghanistan stand on its own, to help the Afghan security forces be as professional as they are. And so an entire generation of soldiers feeling cool, feeling comfortable in arid CADPAT. But that's all that they know for those that have been around for only a decade or so. The Army, recognizing how important it was to take note of the lessons that have been learned in Afghanistan, institutionalize those lessons, some of them tied to structure, Some of them tied to tactics, techniques, and procedures. Some tied to friendship with other government departments. Has invested hugely on behalf of the Canadian Forces. And so we took 1,500 positions and invested them in Canadian Forces enablers. Counter-improvised explosive device task force for the Canadian Forces and the Government of Canada rests inside your Canadian Army. Also, unmanned aerial vehicles, or unmanned vehicles period, like this one here, the Army has invested in because that's the way you define the future. That's the way you advance with purpose in a theater of operations, and the Army has invested in UAVs. Reservists, who I love and admire, magically balance their civilian career with their military career with their family. You know, they're much broader thinking than I am, who all I know and love is the military. So many of you in this room who I look up to, you're much broader in your perspective than I will ever be, and we need to take advantage of your broadness, of your approach for the next theater of operations that we blast off to. I think we're ready for the next challenges. We stand on guard for Canada, this great nation, the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And it will change. And there are challenges that approach our Army. For that generation who feels comfortable in this uniform, it's time to change, and I hope you'll allow me one more time to change, because I'd like you to think of that young soldier, or that maybe not so young soldier, that senior NCO or young officer that knows just this particular CAD-PAT, that it's time to put on a different colored CAD-PAT, one that guys like me perhaps are familiar with and comfortable with, because I wore that, although it was probably a bit of a more solid green, a little while ago. So it's happening. So this is all done from a distance, you know. So there's cameras, and the threats of tomorrow will be dealt with by machines like this, but they are only operated by magically wise Canadian soldiers at a distance that provides them a level of protection. So hey, soldier, it's time to put on your Woodlands CAD-PAT. This is the new version, by the way, for those that might not have seen that. So this particular version of CAD-PAT has been designed by soldiers. Designed by soldiers after a decade of combat. And so it has, it doesn't have that big collar that you young guys didn't like. It has zipper pockets. It doesn't have strings anymore. It has flat pockets because we carry a load-bearing mechanism that carries our magazines and grenades, etc. It's vented at the back to allow guys who are real strong, tough guys, that wouldn't be me, to be able to kind of flex and stuff like that. And it has these big kick-ass Canadian flags on them, which I kind of think is pretty cool too. But the most important point, so this version of Woodlands CAD-PAT, designed by Canadian soldiers, I would suggest it defines that reloaded Army ready to step forward into a new set of challenges. And so we have, on behalf of the Canadian Forces, designed a contemporary training scenario which reflects those challenges of tomorrow. It's no longer solely coin-based or counterinsurgency-based. It is based on a near-peer enemy. It's based on criminal organizations that will operate on in the battle space that we go to tomorrow. You will see non-governmental organizations and international organizations. You will see the UN. You will see coalitions that will all be operating there. You will certainly see aspects of counterinsurgency. And so we are developing those leaders and soldiers to be able to operate in that unbelievably complex environment tomorrow. Wearing this Woodland stuff, or prepared to don that CAD-PAT, that arid CAD-PAT, if that's the area that we are sent to. And so that future security environment is one that will be complex, volatile, and unpredictable. And it will demand a level of agility, versatility, and resilience that I assure you that your Canadian Army, but more importantly than that, your Canadian soldiers will be ready for. Our Army today, 50,000 strong. 20,000 regular force, 20,000-ish reserve force, 5,000 civilians, and 5,000 marvelous rangers that operate in the northern parts of Canada. 50,000 strong. We are half of the Canadian forces, a little bit over half, actually, of the Canadian forces. That's your Army today. And well, I don't want to make you ill with some stats, but let me share another important stat that I think is really important for all of you to know. 4% of that 50,000 works in headquarters. Only 4%. So area headquarters, your national headquarters in Ottawa, so all those staff guys and gals that work there, 4% work there. 75%, ladies and gentlemen, are in the field force. And that other 20-ish% are the folks that work in our schools, like those that are part of the Combat Training Center, as well as the Canadian Maneuver Training Center based out of Wainwright, and our bases across the country that provide that level of institutional support. And as we train and force generate, which is the core part of our business, we put the appropriate emphasis on combined arms training. Because the Army is just one big team, and we cannot function successfully unless we have all elements of the combined arms team. There's been, and I've also asked that there be greater emphasis on collective training. Because over that Afghan period of time, before we sent a young soldier off to train, off to a mission, we wanted to make sure he had all the things necessary. And so it was often delivered by individual training courses and often by that TIC. And you know, I think that we can get a lot more out of training by pushing some of that down to the collective level. I don't mean downloading it, I just mean the wise use of collective training. And that combined arms team, particularly as I look at an absolutely magnificent health services table down there, your Army today, unlike the Army that I grew up in, wonders if there is not casualty play in a training event, then we have failed our soldiers. You know, when I was a young guy, casualty play got in the way of good training, or so we thought. We're a lot different today. We're a lot more modern. We're a lot more appropriate to those challenges, and our young soldiers demand casualty play. And the TCCC badge, it means that you're really good at providing first aid and trauma support. It's a badge of honor now. It's a badge of honor. So those that wear a parachute badge, as an example, or some other badge, wear the TCCC badge on their combats right here with the level of pride that they would wear some type of combat badge like a parachute thing. And you know, we got to keep that alive tomorrow because that's the professional force that your Army has developed over the past decade plus. Level 5 training, which is combat team live fire training, is the Army's vital ground. Vital ground meaning the most important thing that happens, and we need to protect that at all costs, and we need to protect that at the cost of almost all things, because live fire training at the combat team level, a combat team being about 300, 350 guys and gals, is where you synchronize all the effects, lethal and non-lethal, to be able to win. And we do that as part of our managed readiness plan. And it's so important that we protect that combat team live fire training, because it protects Canadian soldiers and protects our mission success as we look to tomorrow. Another thing that I think marvelously has happened over the period of time, and continues to as we wear this Woodlands combat, is the relationship between the Army and the Air Force. We have never been closer. And the operational focus that is on and inside our Air Force is, it makes me really proud. The Air Force has adjusted their managed readiness plan to mirror our managed readiness plan. You know, when you step on the back of a Herc, you step on the back of a C-17 Globemaster, particularly if you step in the back of a helicopter, you feel the operational pride of our Air Force men and women. And that's a magical feeling. Tomorrow, the gunners in the helicopters, whether it be a Chinook or a Griffin, will be manned by Canadian soldiers because that's the way we keep that relationship between the Army and the Air Force vibrant and alive. And so the 450 Squadron, as it stands up, will have Army gunners working the machine guns on either side of the Chinook, and they're the same guys and gals that fired the Devlin and the GAU, the two weapon systems on the Griffin that was employed in Afghanistan. Another thing that is important as we look to tomorrow is a bit of asymmetry inside our Army, and that's a good thing, folks, a good thing. And so I grew up with a belief and a view that our brigades, of which we have 13, 3 regular brigades and 10 reserve brigades. And they all had to be the same because that level, when they were the same, it provided a level of flexibility for tomorrow. And I would suggest to you that the flexibility of tomorrow is defined by having combat capabilities that exist somewhere in Canada and somewhere in our Army. So it's okay if we're a little bit asymmetric. And some of that's already happened. So, you know, tanks are in Western Canada, and so one brigade's kind of a little bit heavier than the rest. We've already made the decision that the Chinooks will be based out of Petawawa, so that gang up in Petawawa will be a little bit lighter than the guys out west. And so those are some of the challenges that we have tomorrow as we move towards some different structures. But they keep all that operational capability alive and vibrant and ready to be able to go and do the nation's business. The Reserve Forces is the face of the Canadian Army across the country, present in 110 communities every single day. If you throw in the Rangers, it grows to over 250 communities every single day. We couldn't do the operations that Canada will call on us tomorrow, and we certainly couldn't have in the past without the support of the reserves. And 25%, as I've mentioned, is what we have leaned on for the reserves over the past decade plus. I think it has made a stronger Canada. I think it certainly has made a stronger Canadian Forces and definitely a stronger Army. We're going to augment with regular force folks in behind the Class B folks that we lose. We're also going to augment to have recruiters on the armory floors, because I think that's important, particularly as our personnel world makes adjustments in how we recruit for the Canadian Forces as a whole. And so those citizen soldiers that are marvelous also have those great operational tasks of the Arctic Response Company Group and the Territorial Battalion Group. I was lucky enough to be in Operation Nanook up in the Arctic, which I'm about to touch on in a sec, this past summer, where the concept had an immediate response unit that dealt with a crisis in the Mackenzie River Delta. But their relief in place was executed by an Arctic Response Company Group. And man, were they ever professional. Were they ever swift? Were they ever key to having an operational capability up in the north, as are the territorial battalion groups, an important factor, an important point to give operationalize the roles of the reserve. We move forward. The Army moves forward, and I have one more uniform to change to. And I do that because the Arctic presents a challenge to us. I grew up inside an Army that was quite comfortable wearing Arctic whites. And I'm not sure when the last time you folks, when was the last time you folks had your Arctic Whites on? Last weekend. Good for you. And this weekend. Awesome. But you know, so an old guy grew up in an army that wore Arctic Whites on a regular basis. And we were really good at operating in the cold. We were really gifted at it. And so as I don my Arctic Whites, which if you remember goes over top of a parka, I do this to symbolize what great potential the Arctic has for Canada. I mean, we're all proud to be a northern nation. We're all fiercely proud of what potential the Arctic gives to Canada, whether it be resources, whether it be the future, whether it be water, whether it be access, whether it be trade routes. I mean, the Arctic is key for Canada tomorrow. And so I'd also suggest to you all that the Arctic provides a unique opportunity for us to provide a level of adversity in training that soldiers seek. They cherish opportunities for adverse training. Adverse training gives war stories that provide memories to being alongside men and women who have suffered a level of adversity. And so when you're cold, and when you're fighting for survival up in the north, when you're wondering about how hard it is to lead in the north, the Arctic provides that for us. And so we need a level of adversity inside the Army, because if you go back to those guys and gals that feel comfortable wearing that arid cadpat, they've operated out of a forward operating base where they came back to, you know, they had hot showers whenever they wanted. They had internet access. They had telephones. They had 3 hot squares a day and more. And so, you know, pulling a toboggan with your rations and your fuel is a good thing for leaders. It's a good thing for Canadian soldiers. And so the Arctic, and wearing your Arctic Whites, your winter whites, has great potential for the Canadian Army tomorrow. Change has been part of Army life. While I've been in uniform, it's been part of your lives, whether you're in uniform or not. We will continue to have change. And we will share that with other government departments. My priorities over this past year are tied to being reloaded, to force generation, which includes support to our ongoing operations and training, and lastly, people. And the people priority is really important because it provides an opportunity to reflect on history and heritage, 1812 and royal designations. We continue to respect and value the contribution that families make to our preparedness, caring for the wounded, and a culture of total health and fitness. So those have been Devlin's priorities. They continue to be my priorities: reloaded, force generation, and people. The Army will remain Canada's force of decisive action, because a nation is only truly decisively engaged when they commit boots to the ground. And so your Army, Canada's Army, is Canada's force of decisive action. Remember that. I believe in my whole heart that that is what the Army is all about. We are rapidly deployable. Today, we are rapidly deployable. We're incredibly well trained. We have versatile soldiers that value effective leadership and excellent teamwork. As I said, we are just one big team. The Army continues to look to the future for the challenges of tomorrow. And as always, your Army is distinguished by soldiers that are loyal, determined, and hardworking. And so I thank you all for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on your Army. Canada's Army, which is reloaded, your Army, which is looking with great attention to the challenges of tomorrow and is populated by great soldiers. Many of the soldiers that are in this room today are fine examples of that vibrant Army that is ready to stand on guard for thee. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. A great pleasure to be able to be with you this evening. Thank you.